Hello there ladies, gentlemen and all variations thereupon. This week I'm going to be doing something a little bit different. You see, I've wanted for a while to draw a map. Specifically, I've wanted to draw a map of the area that I grew up in as a child. The reason I want to do that sort of area as a map is because if you follow the river that runs there, upstream a little bit, you get to a place called Sheol Mill. Now Sheol Mill was a place that Tolkien spent some of his childhood, and as a result some of the things in the area are associated with the Lord of the Rings and are possibly things that inspired him in writing the Lord of the Rings. Because Tolkien has a local connection to the area, I thought it would be nice to draw that area and make it into a fantasy map. So not just a map of the area that I lived in, but a fantasy map of the area that I lived in. So taking things that actually exist and making them into a fantasy realm. I thought that would be quite fun. Now normally when I do a video like this, a long form video, I'll give a bit of a tutorial on how you can do it yourself. I'm not actually going to do that this time because I've learnt a lot of this cartography skill from an artist and cartographer named endeavoured. Now endeavoured you might be familiar with if you're familiar with Critical Role. She draws some of the maps that they use on there. She has a tutorial series herself that's paid for, and so I would feel quite bad if I watched that and then taught you the techniques for free that she's been selling. Now before I start, I should say that I've already done a loose sketch of the area I grew up in. I've taken basically a shot from Google Earth and I've just sketched on the main features that I want to carry over into my fantasy map. So I've marked on things like the river, the main roads, where the shopping centre is, and so forth. And now there are two ways I can go about creating this map. I can continue doing what I have been doing, which is showing it from a top-down perspective, which is the way we see maps most of the time nowadays. But the way I'm going to draw this is going to be slightly different, something that was more common in older maps, where we're doing a sort of angled perspective. So I'm raised up higher and looking out over the area that the map's covering. So the things closer to me are going to be larger, and they're going to block some of the things behind, so we'll have like a layered going back effect. So as I'm doing it that way, I'm going to start at the bottom right corner and work back up to the top left. First I'm going to draw it in pencil, something so it can be rough, can be erased, and then afterwards I'm going to go over in ink in order to permanently solidify the design on the map. Now in this bottom right area, it is actually the green belt that goes around the city. There are, industrial areas nearby, things that you don't really want in residential areas, but you want close by so that people can access it. Rail links and things come through here. But they can't quite fit in with fantasy, so let's turn this into farmland, as there is still some farmland in the area, as it is the green belt. I'm going to draw them as if they're ridge and furrow farmlands, which is something that was done in medieval times as a way of parcelling out the land. Nowadays we tend to have square fields, not rigidly defined enclosed areas. In the past, in feudal times, there would have been, you'd have a field, but then the ploughed areas, the ridges that you planted crops on, individual farmers would have ownership, basically, not proper ownership, but sort of ownership of those. So they'd own the crops that are grown on. Part of it goes to the Lord. All the land belonged either to the Lord or the church. So there was no sense in enclosing it. So you get an area of land rather than a whole field. As a result, sometimes things can be a bit higgledy-piggledy and not quite look straight. Although I suppose in America now you don't even have square fields anymore. You have like big circular things, don't you, with a centralised irrigation system. And to an extent now, scale doesn't really matter too much. So some people can look a lot larger than they would actually be relative to the size of the map. I'm not going to do tiny little stick figures in order to fit them on the map and make everything look to scale. They're just going to be people on there and they're going to look a lot larger. Now the reason I wanted to draw from this angle, so it's facing north, is because there's something going to be quite prominent at the front, which is very highly connected to a local legend. You see, this main road that comes down here goes from Coastal down somewhere else, just here off towards some southern city. But it's quite a main busy road at the moment. In the past it wasn't quite so much. This whole area was only built up after World War II. But before then it was largely forest. And there's this tree that sits on the south side of a road. If you go up to that tree at the moment, you'll see that there's a little tiny fairy door at the bottom of it. Now, it's a fairly famous site, famous locally. It's famous enough that it became a poker stop when Pokemon Go was a thing, because it was a landmark that people knew. Now, this fairy door has a legend connected with it because there are creatures that used to live in this forest called woodlings. The woodlings are sort of like elves or hobbits, sort of hobgoblin sort of things. They're magical little creatures that can grant wishes, and they look like they're little men made out of wood. One of these woodlings lives in this tree with the fairy door at the bottom. This fey creature, this woodling, the legend goes, was sitting outside of his tree home one day when a man came across him. And the man obviously was shocked to see this little enchanted creature there. But the creature just looked sad and longingly across the road. The man asked it what was the matter, and it said that it's buried its treasure on the far side of this busy road. But since this road's been built and all the trees cut down, he can't get to the other side of the road to his treasure. And so he made a deal with the man. He said, if you go over to this other side of the road and dig up my treasure and bring it back to me, I'll grant you a wish. The man agreed, of course. So he goes over the other side of the road to the area known as Chelsea Wood, and began digging up the ground just to try and find the treasure. And he was shocked. Everywhere he dug, there was gold. It was just lying there in the ground, gold and jewels and silver and all manner of wonderful things. And as he was digging it up, he started to become greedy and thinking to himself, I could go back and grant a wish, but I don't know that this creature is actually going to grant a wish. It is a fey creature after all, and we all know you can't trust fey creatures. So this guy, he decides instead he's going to keep what he's got already. After all, what would he wish for? Great wealth. He's already got it. So he just kept the money. But the woodling recognised what this man was doing when he didn't come back. And so the woodling used his magic to turn all of the treasure into stones. Which explains why the area has such hard stony soil. Because it was once all woodling treasure. And now it's been turned into stone. So wherever you dig now in Chelsea Wood, you always find stones. Now, even though this is a fairly famous local legend, there are very few people actually know the details of it. A lot of people know about the fairy door, but very few people know the story around it. And you might think that the story of the woodlings and this particular fable is very, very old, going back to Anglo-Saxon times. I'm not certain how far back the woodlings go, but this story doesn't go back that far, and I know that for a fact. You see, if you go to places like Greenland or Iceland or things like that, they tend to have these areas that are supposed to be where the elves live, and they build roads around it rather than go through it because, you know, people there actually believe that these elves exist. They obviously don't. We can tell this story of the woodling as if it exists, but that fairy door has been put there within my own lifetime. I believe, if my memory serves, although I was a child at the time, it was just somebody died there, got hit by a car, and somebody noticed that the bit of bark missing on the bottom of the tree looked like a door, so they turned it into a fairy door when they were leaving all the flowers there for the person who died. And it's just like stuck, and a story has been created around it. So even though we can all act and pretend for children that these woodlings exist and you know, there's stories connected with it. In reality, none of us actually believe it. Now, of course, the woodlings are known beyond that one story, and overall, the woodlings are probably quite a lot older than my lifetime. Indeed, as the entire place was built up just after World War II, so sort of 1950s, 60s sort of time, there was something that was built, which is something of a totem to the woodlings, and the outside of what remains of the forest. They've had to remove the very top of it now because it got too old and damp and rotten. But there is a large column that did have a head sitting on it, and around it were little stools. Nobody really knows what that was for. People who built it, I'm sure, did. But no one in the area knows. It's just we call it it's of the bogey or the poo and the stick. That's what we called it. But really, I think it was there originally just as a totem to the woodlings. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But if it is, then it shows that the woodlings were a story that was around even as the place was being built. And there are a lot of stories from people that were building the shopping centre nearby in the 60s that they would say that, like, when tools had gone missing and things like that, that it was the woodlings that were stealing it and moving it around, and they were like mischievous, playful creatures. So I think the story of the woodlings is probably older than the actual estate. And there is this area up here which I'm going to mark on with something, but it's the area, it's an open field, but it's where, like, if there was a fun fair or something like that, that's the place that we would have it. So I've drawn little circus tents and things, but there's not really much I can do to depict that because I can't put a Ferris wheel there if it's a fantasy map. So you know, what do you do? Now, as we get up to the north of the map, we're getting to the point where the river would flow out into Sheol Mill, where Tolkien was. And at the top here, there's another mill, so to speak. There's no mill there now, but it's called Bab's Mill. Bab's Mill Lake, specifically. The mill's gone, but the name's remained. And around here, there is still quite a lot of woodland. So it's the place where, I suppose, the woodlings would be most evident. But because the river here runs down from Sheol Mill, I like to think of the waters of the lake as being particularly magical. So if you walk there, especially in the dead of winter when the winds are strong and the leaves are sparse, the trees tend to creak and groan. It often sounds like the trees are talking to each other, like they are alive. Some say perhaps they even move. But the trees there have deep roots and drink deeply from the river. So basically, I'm going to be drawing in that area the Ents. I'm going to have an Ent moot in the area just as an homage to Tolkien being up the river that way, and the fact that there are a lot of trees in the area. So maybe this is the area where I shall include the Ents. Of course, it isn't actually a windmill here. This is just artistic license. Up in this top corner, there is a pub called the George and Dragon. Now, if you're familiar with your saints, you'll know St George was the slayer of the dragon. He's a patron saint of England, and there are a lot of pubs called the George and Dragon. The George is quite a nice pub to go to. But I don't really want to draw another pub on there, as I already have the Greenwood marked on, and that's a lot closer. I can get in more detail. So I'm going to draw the George and Dragon as literally George and Dragon. St. George slaying the dragon. You know, adds a little bit of colour to the map, doesn't it? And although St. George is the patron saint of England, he's not actually English. He was originally, let's say, Turkish. He was born in the Byzantine Empire in what would today be Turkey. He became the patron saint of England primarily around the time of the Crusades. Before that, England had a different patron saint that was actually the King of England at one point, King Edward the Confessor. He was a king who famously didn't have an heir when he died, and you know, if you're a king who rules by hereditary rights, you kind of need to have a designated heir. Hence why, after he died, not leaving a direct heir, a direct line of succession, we ended up with something called 1066 in the year of crisis, with all the invasions that were happening as people tried to take control of England. Don't know why he got to be the saint. It seems like he messed up the one job he actually had. And so there we have it, a fantasy map drawn based on the area I grew up. I'm quite happy with how it's turned out. There are a few more things I could do. I could colour it, and I could like tear up the edges or stain it to try and make it look older, but I actually don't like it when things look like that. I like things to be black and white. It's my sort of style. I also probably could have done a bit more of a tutorial thing, because I think my style is significantly different from Devon Rue's, but I didn't know exactly how much of her tutorial I was going to use, so I'm glad I didn't. But anyway, that was a fun little exercise, and now that it's all done, yeah, there's nothing left to say except I'll see you in the next video.